After 42 years of working as a cardiac nurse, saving countless lives and sacrificing my own comfort for others, I thought I could finally breathe easy. I had reached the age of 68, and my retirement had arrived at last. It felt like a hard-earned victory. But I never imagined my own children would betray me while I was at my most vulnerable, or that a single document hidden in my grandfather's antique desk would be my salvation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I retired from Memorial General Hospital was surreal. For over 4 decades, I had walked those sterile hallways, comforted frightened patients before their surgeries, and held the hands of those taking their final breaths. I had missed birthdays, holidays, and school recitals because someone's father or mother or child needed me more in that moment. The hospital had been my second home, and my colleagues had become family. Dr. Reynolds, the chief of cardiology who had worked with me for 25 years, gave a touching speech at my retirement party. "Eleanor Blackwood isn't just the finest cardiac nurse I've ever worked with," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's the backbone of this department. I've seen her talk patients back from the brink when medicine couldn't help them. I've seen her work 36-hour shifts during crises without a single complaint. If I ever need cardiac care, I pray Eleanor will come out of retirement for me." Everyone laughed, but there were tears in their eyes. I felt both pride and a strange emptiness. Who would I be without my scrubs, my stethoscope, my patients? My children, Thomas and Rebecca, attended the retirement party, though they arrived late and left early. Thomas, my eldest at 43, was a real estate developer with a perpetual frown that had etched permanent lines between his eyebrows. Rebecca, 39, worked as a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company and always seemed to be checking her phone, even during our rare family dinners. "Great party, Mom," Thomas said as he hugged me goodbye, his expensive cologne almost overwhelming. "We should talk about your plans soon, for the future." "I have plans," I replied, smiling. "I'm going to sleep in past 5 a.m. for the first time in decades. I'm going to read all those books I've been collecting. I'm going to fix up the house." Rebecca glanced up from her phone long enough to give me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "That's great, Mom, but Thomas is right. We should have a serious conversation about next steps. Retirement is a big adjustment." I didn't think much of their comments then. I was too caught up in the bittersweet emotions of leaving my career behind, too focused on the mixture of fear and excitement about what came next. If I had been paying closer attention, perhaps I would have seen the calculation in their eyes, the way they surveyed the room as if assessing its value rather than celebrating my accomplishments. My husband, Richard, had passed away 7 years earlier from the very cardiac condition I had spent my career helping others survive. The irony wasn't lost on me. Despite all my knowledge and connections, I couldn't save him. His death had left a void in my life that work had partially filled, but retirement meant facing that emptiness head-on. The Victorian house we had purchased, as newlyweds 45 years ago, had been our pride and joy. Built in 1897, it had high ceilings, intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch where Richard and I had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. We had restored it room by room over the decades, often working on weekends and evenings when I wasn't at the hospital. Our home was located in the historic district of Mapleton, a charming town that had recently become discovered by wealthy professionals looking for character and charm without the price tag of the big city just 30 miles away. Property values had skyrocketed, and several of my neighbors had sold to developers who converted the grand old homes into luxury condominiums or boutique businesses. The first week of retirement was blissful disorientation. I woke without an alarm, drank my coffee on the porch without rushing, and began sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. I found Richard's old vinyl records and played them on the turntable, dancing alone in our living room to the songs of our youth. I started a vegetable garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I reconnected with old friends who had retired years before me. I was pruning roses in the front garden when Thomas's sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway unexpectedly. He wasn't alone. Rebecca was with him, along with a man I didn't recognize carrying a leather portfolio. "Mom, you look great," Thomas said, kissing my cheek. "Retirement agrees with you." "We brought lunch," Rebecca added, holding up a bag from an expensive deli downtown. "And someone we'd like you to meet." The stranger stepped forward, hand extended. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Garrett Phillips from Prestige Senior Living. Your children thought it might be helpful for us to chat about the exciting options available for this next chapter of your life." I felt a chill despite the warm spring air. "I appreciate the visit, but I'm quite happy with my current living situation." Thomas placed his hand on my shoulder, steering me toward the house. "Let's just hear what Garrett has to say, Mom. No harm in listening." Over lunch at my dining room table, the same table where I had helped both of my children with their homework decades ago, Garrett gave a polished presentation about Prestige Senior Living's luxury retirement community. The units were spacious, the amenities impressive, the medical care on-site comprehensive. It was clearly expensive. "We've actually toured the facility," Rebecca said brightly. "It's beautiful, Mom, like a high-end resort, and there's a wonderful community of people your age." "My age?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean old people?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas sighed. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too big for you now. It's too much maintenance. And with your nursing background, you know better than anyone how quickly health can decline in your 60s. "I'm perfectly healthy," I countered. "My last physical was excellent. My doctor said I have the heart and lungs of someone 20 years younger." "For now," Rebecca said, her tone maddeningly patronizing. "But what happens when you fall on those steep Victorian stairs? Or when you can't manage the garden anymore? We're just thinking ahead." Garrett smiled blandly. "Many of our residents say they wish they'd made the move sooner, before a health crisis forced the decision. I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but this is my home. Richard and I restored it together. Every room holds memories. I'm not going anywhere." The conversation shifted after that, but I caught the looks my children exchanged: disappointment, frustration, and something else I couldn't quite identify. When they left an hour later, I felt unsettled. Why the sudden concern about my living situation? They had never shown such interest in my welfare before. Over the next few weeks, their visits became more frequent. Thomas brought a handyman to assess maintenance issues without asking me first. Rebecca suggested clearing out clutter to make the house more manageable. Each visit included not-so-subtle comments about the value of properties in the neighborhood, the burden of maintaining a historic home, or news about someone their age whose parent had suffered a fall or health emergency while living alone. The pattern was becoming clear, but I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge what it meant. These were my children, whom I had nursed through chickenpox and heartbreaks, whom I had supported through college and career changes, whose own children, my grandchildren, I had babysat countless times despite my grueling work schedule. Surely, they couldn't be plotting to push me out of my home for financial gain. Then came the bathroom incident. I had been experiencing occasional dizzy spells. Nothing serious, just brief moments of lightheadedness when I stood up too quickly. I hadn't mentioned them to anyone, not wanting to give Thomas and Rebecca ammunition for their retirement community campaign. One evening, after a particularly long day working in the garden, I stood up from the bathtub too quickly. The room spun, my foot slipped on the tile, and I fell, hitting my head on the edge of the sink. I woke to the sound of my own alarm system being disarmed. I had given Thomas the code years ago for emergencies, and voices downstairs. "Mom?" Thomas called. "Your car's here, but you're not answering your phone. Are you home?" I was groggy, confused and embarrassed to be lying naked on the bathroom floor. "Up here," I managed to call out. "I've had a bit of an accident." What followed was a flurry of activity. Rebecca called an ambulance despite my protests that I could manage. Thomas found me a robe and helped me sit up, his expression a mixture of concern and something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. "This is exactly what we've been worried about, Mom," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't live alone in this house anymore. It's not safe." The paramedics arrived quickly, checking my vital signs and examining the gash on my forehead. They were concerned about possible concussion and wanted to take me to the hospital for observation. I tried to refuse. The irony of ending up as a patient in the hospital I had just retired from was too much, but everyone insisted. "We'll take care of everything, Mom," Rebecca promised as they loaded me into the ambulance. "You just focus on getting better." "My house," I said, suddenly anxious. "Make sure the doors are locked and the stove is off. And—" "Don't worry about the house," Thomas interrupted. "We'll handle it." I spent 3 days in the hospital. The concussion was mild, but my doctor, a former colleague, insisted on running a full battery of tests since I had lost consciousness. The dizzy spells, it turned out, were related to a new blood pressure medication I had started recently. My doctor adjusted the dosage, and the problem was solved. What struck me during my hospital stay was how infrequently Thomas and Rebecca visited. They called to check on me, certainly, but they seemed distracted, too busy to stop by for more than a few minutes each day. It was Mrs. Abernathy from next door who brought me fresh nightgowns and magazines, who sat with me for hours sharing neighborhood gossip and keeping my spirits up. On the afternoon I was to be discharged, both Thomas and Rebecca arrived together, looking unusually formal in business attire. "We have a surprise for you, Mom," Rebecca said, her smile too bright. "We've secured you a spot at Prestige Senior Living. They normally have a waiting list, but they had a cancellation and were willing to expedite your application given your medical situation." I stared at her in disbelief. "My medical situation is resolved. It was just a medication adjustment, and I never applied to Prestige." "We handled the paperwork," Thomas explained smoothly. "All the arrangements have been made. You can move in this weekend." "I'm going home," I said firmly. "To my house." They exchanged that look again, the one I was beginning to detest. "Mom," Thomas began carefully, "we've been doing a lot of thinking while you've been here. That house isn't just unsafe for you. It's a financial burden. The property taxes, the maintenance, the utilities for a space that size. It doesn't make sense when you could be living somewhere with everything taken care of." "We've actually spoken to a developer," Rebecca added, pulling out her phone to show me photos. "Jenkins Properties is very interested in the lot. They'd demolish the house, of course. It's too outdated to salvage. But they're planning a beautiful multi-use building with luxury apartments and high-end retail on the ground floor." My heart began to race. Demolish the house? Our home? The house your father and I poured our hearts into for 45 years? The house where you both grew up? "Mom, be reasonable," Thomas said, his tone hardening. "That house is a gold mine sitting on prime real estate. Jenkins is offering $1.8 million split 3 ways, that's $600,000 each. Your entire stay at Prestige would be covered with plenty left over. Rebecca and I could pay off our mortgages, set up college funds for the grandkids." "Split 3 ways?" I interrupted, my voice barely a whisper. "It's my house. The only one with a claim to it besides me was your father, and he's gone." Rebecca reached for my hand, her expression pityingly patient. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You've had a head injury. Of course we wouldn't leave you out of the equation. But as your children and likely caregivers as you age, we have a stake in these decisions." I pulled my hand away, a terrible suspicion forming. Have you already spoken to Jenkins about selling my house? The slight flush on Thomas's face told me everything. We've had preliminary discussions, he admitted. Nothing binding, but they're very interested, and they don't want to wait long. These opportunities don't come around every day. I closed my eyes, fighting waves of shock and betrayal. When I opened them, I made sure my expression was calm, my voice steady. I'll need time to process all this, I said carefully. Let's get me home, and we can discuss options later when I'm feeling stronger. They seemed relieved by my apparent capitulation, though Thomas looked slightly suspicious. That's very reasonable, Mom, Rebecca said, patting my arm. We'll take you home today, help you pack some essentials, and you can stay with one of us, while you recover fully. Then we can plan the move to Prestige. I'd like to go to my house first, I insisted. There are important papers I need to collect, medications, personal items. Thomas nodded reluctantly. All right, but we won't leave you alone there. Not after what happened. The drive to my house was tense with unspoken accusations. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked on the street. Thomas saw my questioning look. Jenkins sent some people to evaluate the property, he explained, not meeting my eyes. Just preliminary assessments, checking the lot dimensions, taking photos, that sort of thing. My fury threatened to choke me, but I kept my face impassive. I see. Inside, my beloved home had already taken on the feeling of a place being dismantled. There were post-it notes on certain pieces of furniture, Rebecca's handwriting labeling items as Mom's, or donation, or for Rebecca, or for Thomas. Someone had been through my filing cabinet. The folders were in different order than I had left them. I need a moment alone, I said, my voice tight. I'm going to use the bathroom and then gather some personal items from my bedroom. I'll come with you, Rebecca offered quickly. I think I can manage to use the bathroom by myself, I replied with a sharpness that made her step back. I'll call if I need help. Once upstairs, I closed and locked the bathroom door, then splashed cold water on my face. Think, Eleanor, I told myself. You need to act quickly. Instead of going to my bedroom as I had indicated, I slipped quietly into Richard's old office, a room I had closed off after his death, unable to bear the emptiness of it. Everything was exactly as he had left it, from the half-empty coffee mug, which Mrs. Abernathy had kindly washed out years ago, to the stack of medical journals he had been reviewing. Richard had been a medical malpractice attorney, meticulous and thorough. He had taught me early in our marriage about the importance of documentation, of keeping records, of planning for contingencies. The world is full of people who will try to take advantage of you, he used to say, not because they're evil, but because it's human nature to look out for oneself first. I went straight to his antique roll-top desk, a family heirloom from his grandfather. It looked like an ordinary, if valuable, piece of furniture. But Richard had shown me its secret, a hidden compartment accessible only if you knew exactly where to press on the intricate woodwork. My fingers found the spot from memory, and the small drawer popped open silently. Inside was exactly what I was looking for. The original deed to our house, updated after we had paid off the mortgage 20 years ago, along with Richard's meticulous estate planning documents. I had another copy of the deed filed with our attorney, of course, but this was the official registered version with the county seal. More importantly, there was a sealed envelope with my name on it in Richard's handwriting. I had found it after his death, but hadn't had the heart to open it yet. Now, hands trembling, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter and a second, smaller envelope. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're facing some difficulty that's led you to search for these documents. I've planned as carefully as I could for every contingency, but I know that life has a way of surprising us. I read quickly, tears blurring my vision. Richard had anticipated everything, including the possibility that our children might try to claim the house after his death. The second envelope contained amendments to his will that he had prepared secretly, ensuring that the house would remain solely in my name and could not be sold without my explicit consent, validated by our family attorney, Mr. Harrington. The amendments specified that if Thomas or Rebecca attempted to force a sale of the property during my lifetime, they would forfeit their inheritance entirely. The house and all our assets would pass instead to a medical scholarship fund we had established years ago. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly returned the documents to the secret compartment, except for the deed which I slipped into my pocket. I moved to the bedroom just as Rebecca appeared in the hallway. "Mom, are you okay? You've been up here a while." "Just gathering some things," I said, grabbing a random assortment of clothes from my dresser. "I'm almost ready." Rebecca eyed me suspiciously but nodded. "Thomas is getting impatient. The Jenkins people want to do a walkthrough of the house today if possible." "Today?" I echoed, unable to hide my shock. "I was just discharged from the hospital. I've agreed to nothing." She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "It's just a preliminary assessment, Mom. No decisions are being made yet." I nodded, saying nothing, and followed her downstairs where Thomas was talking intently with a woman in a sharply tailored suit. He broke off when he saw me, making hasty introductions. "Mom, this is Valerie Jenkins of Jenkins Properties. Valerie, my mother, Eleanor Blackwood." Valerie offered her hand, which I ignored. "Mrs. Blackwood, your home is absolutely stunning. Such character, such history. It's a shame it's not practical to preserve it, but I assure you our development will honor the aesthetic of the neighborhood while bringing it into the 21st century." I looked directly at Thomas, then at Rebecca. "I'd like to go now. I'm suddenly feeling quite tired." "Of course," Thomas said quickly. "Rebecca will take you to her house to rest. I'll stay here to finish up with Valerie and her team, then join you later to discuss next steps." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not staying with either of you. I'd like to go to Mrs. Abernathy's. She's already offered to let me stay while I recover." This threw them off balance. They had clearly expected to keep me under close supervision. "Mom, that's not necessary," Rebecca protested. "Mrs. Abernathy is what, 80? She can't take care of you." "I don't need care," I reminded them. "My doctor has cleared me. I just need rest, and I'd prefer to get it in a quiet environment where developers aren't evaluating my home for demolition while I'm still living in it." The look on Thomas's face shifted from confusion to calculation as I stood my ground in the foyer of my own home. "Mom, be reasonable," he said, lowering his voice so Valerie Jenkins couldn't hear. "Mrs. Abernathy is a lovely neighbor, but you need family right now, professional care." "What I need," I replied with steel in my voice, "is to not be bulldozed, literally and figuratively, while I'm barely out of a hospital bed." Rebecca touched my arm, her expression softening to the one she used when negotiating with difficult clients. I recognized it from the pharmaceutical company's holiday party last year. "Mom, we're just trying to help. Everything's happening so fast because we worry about you. That fall could have been so much worse." I looked around at the strangers in suits measuring my living room, at the post-it notes labeling my possessions like items at an estate sale, at my children's faces, concerned on the surface but with unmistakable calculation underneath. In that moment, something crystallized within me. These were not the children I had raised, or perhaps they were, and I had been blind to who they truly were all along. "Call Mrs. Abernathy," I said quietly to Rebecca. "Tell her I'm ready to be picked up." Thomas started to protest, but I silenced him with a look I had perfected over 4 decades of managing unruly patients and arrogant doctors. "This is not a negotiation. Either you call Mrs. Abernathy or I walk next door myself." While Rebecca reluctantly made the call, I gathered a few more personal items, including my medication and, most importantly, a small framed photo of Richard and me on our 30th anniversary. I needed his calm wisdom now more than ever. As I moved through the house, I overheard Valerie Jenkins speaking to one of her associates. The dormer windows will have to go. Too costly to replicate in the new design. But we could salvage the stained glass for the lobby, give it that historic touch the marketing team is looking for. My blood boiled, but I kept my expression neutral. Now was not the time for confrontation. I needed to think, to plan, to channel Richard's methodical approach to crisis. Mrs. Abernathy arrived 15 minutes later, her ancient Volvo chugging into the driveway. At 83, Harriet Abernathy was a force of nature. A retired history professor with razor-sharp intellect and no patience for nonsense. She had been my friend and neighbor for 35 years, and she had loved Richard almost as much as I did. "Eleanor, darling," she called, marching past Thomas as if he were invisible. "Ready to escape this vulture convention?" Despite everything, I almost laughed at Thomas's offended expression. Harriet had never bothered to hide her low opinion of my children, whom she considered privileged beyond their merit. Richard used to say she was the only person he knew who could deliver a compliment and an insult in the same breath. "More than ready," I replied, hugging her tightly. Thomas stepped forward. "Mrs. Abernathy, my mother has suffered a concussion. She needs proper monitoring and care, not a sleepover with a neighbor." Harriet raised one silver eyebrow. "Thomas, I taught medieval history for 40 years. I've studied more forms of torture and treachery than you can imagine. Don't test me. Your mother will be perfectly safe with me." Rebecca tried a gentler approach. "We appreciate your help, Mrs. Abernathy, but we've made arrangements for Mom at Prestige." "That overpriced storage facility for inconvenient elders?" Harriet interrupted. "Over my dead body. Now, Eleanor, let's go before I say something truly unforgivable to your offspring." The drive to Harriet's house took less than 2 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. Her Victorian was similar to mine in architecture but wildly different in decor. Where my home was tasteful and traditional, hers was a riot of color and eccentricity, filled with artifacts from her global travels and academic career. "Those vipers," she muttered as she settled me in her guest room. I always told Richard they were too concerned with status and not enough with substance. "They're still my children, Harriet," I said wearily. "Biology doesn't excuse behavior," she replied crisply. "Now, tell me everything. Leave nothing out." Over cups of strong English tea, I recounted the events of the past weeks. The retirement, the increasing pressure about the house, the fall, and finally, finding Richard's hidden documents and letter. When I finished, Harriet was silent for a long moment, her academic mind clearly processing and analyzing. "You need legal counsel," she said finally. "Not just any lawyer, someone formidable. Someone unconnected to your family who won't be charmed or intimidated by Thomas's position or Rebecca's manipulations." "I'm a step ahead of you," I replied. Richard's letter mentioned his colleague, Mr. Harrington. He knows about the amendments to the will and the deed situation. "Perfect. Call him first thing tomorrow. But tonight..." Harriet reached into a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of expensive scotch. "Tonight we drink to Richard's foresight and to your backbone. I always said you had a spine of steel under that nurturing exterior." The scotch burned pleasantly, warming me from the inside. For the first time since my fall, I felt myself relaxing, safe in the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this fight. My phone had been buzzing with texts and calls from Thomas and Rebecca, which I ignored. Finally, around 9 p.m., I sent them both the same message. "I'm safe and resting. We'll talk tomorrow. Please do not make any more arrangements regarding my house without my consent." Rebecca responded immediately. "We're worried about you, Mom. Just want what's best for you. Call in the morning." Love you. Thomas's reply came an hour later. Jenkins needs an answer by end of week. Opportunity. Won't last. Think about the grandkids' future. I showed Harriet both messages. She snorted. Translation: We're worried you'll ruin our plans, and I've already spent my share of the proceeds in my head. When did they become like this? I wondered aloud. What did I do wrong? Harriet refilled our glasses. Nothing. You worked hard, saved lives, and raised your children with every advantage. They made their own choices about what values to prioritize. Some people, when exposed to privilege, learn gratitude. Others learn entitlement. That night, I slept better than I had since before my retirement. Perhaps it was the scotch, or the knowledge that Richard had protected me even in death, or simply the comfort of being with a true friend who saw me clearly. In the morning, I called Mr. Harrington's office as soon as it opened. His secretary recognized my name immediately and put me through. Mrs. Blackwood, he said warmly. I've been expecting your call, though I admit not under these circumstances. Richard told me you might need my services someday regarding the house. We arranged to meet that afternoon. Meanwhile, both Thomas and Rebecca had started calling. Again, increasingly frustrated by my continued silence. Finally, Rebecca texted that they were coming to Harriet's house at noon to sort this out. Good, Harriet said when I told her. I'd prefer to have this confrontation on my territory, where they can't control the situation. At precisely noon, Thomas's SUV pulled into Harriet's driveway. He and Rebecca marched up to the door looking like corporate executives heading into a difficult negotiation. Harriet opened the door before they could knock. Wipe your feet, she instructed. The carpet is Persian. Thomas ignored her, making a beeline for me where I sat in Harriet's sunroom. Mom, this has gone far enough. You're acting irrationally. We've been calling for hours. I was sleeping, I replied calmly. Doctor's orders after a concussion. Rebecca sat beside me, taking my hand. Mom, we're worried. You left the hospital yesterday and immediately shut us out. That's not like you. I looked at her beautiful face, so like Richard's with those same deep-set eyes and determined chin, and felt a profound sadness. What's not like me is discovering that my children were arranging to sell my home out from under me while I was in a hospital bed. Thomas sighed dramatically. We weren't selling it without your knowledge. We were exploring options, setting things in motion so you wouldn't have to worry about the details. Setting things in motion, I repeated. Like labeling my possessions for distribution? Like having developers measure for demolition before I'd even agreed to sell? Like securing me a place in a retirement facility I've repeatedly said I don't want? Rebecca squeezed my hand. You're upset, and that's understandable. But try to see this from our perspective. This house is an enormous asset that's just sitting here. It could be working for all of us. All of us, I repeated. You mean you want your inheritance now, while I'm still alive to see you spend it? Thomas flushed angrily. That's unfair, Mom. We're thinking of your welfare, too. This house is a death trap for someone your age. The stairs, the old wiring, the maintenance. The valuable land it sits on, Harriet interjected from the doorway. The $1.8 million Jenkins is offering. Stay out of this, Mrs. Abernathy, Thomas snapped. This is a family matter. And I'm family, she replied serenely. Chosen family. The kind that doesn't try to sell Eleanor's house while she's concussed. I stood up, steadier than I had felt in days. I have an appointment with Mr. Harrington at 3 o'clock. I'd like you both to come with me. They exchanged confused glances. Dad's old colleague? Rebecca asked. Why? Because we need legal clarity on exactly who has the right to make decisions about my house and my future. I think we'll all benefit from having that information. Thomas looked suspicious but nodded slowly. Fine. We'll follow you there. Actually, I said, I'll ride with you, Thomas. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. In the car, with Rebecca following behind us, I turned to my son. Do you remember when you were 10 and you broke Mrs. Peterson's window with your baseball? He frowned, caught off guard by the question. Vaguely. Why? You were so scared to tell us. But instead of hiding it, you came straight home and confessed. Dad and I were so proud of your honesty that we paid for the window without punishing. You. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Mom, I don't see how a childhood anecdote. What happened to that honest little boy, Thomas? When did money become more important than integrity? His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. That's not fair. This isn't about money. It's about practicality. That house is too big, too old, too valuable to waste as a single-family residence for a widow. The word widow stung, but I pushed past it. That waste is my home. The place. Your father and I built our lives, raised our children, celebrated every Christmas and birthday. The place he died. How can you dismiss that so easily? For a moment, I glimpsed vulnerability in his expression. It's just a house, Mom. Just wood and plaster. Dad is gone. Memories don't need a specific location. Is that how you feel about your home? Just wood and plaster? Would you sell it out from under your wife if a good offer came along? He didn't answer. The house isn't the only issue, I continued quietly. It's how you and Rebecca went behind my back. It's the assumption that I'm suddenly incapable of making my own decisions because I'm retired. It's the disrespect. We drove in silence for a while before Thomas spoke again, his voice softer. We didn't mean disrespect. I thought we were helping, taking charge of a difficult situation. Taking charge, I repeated. Not supporting, not asking, not respecting my wishes. Taking charge, as if I were a child or an invalid. You're twisting my words. And you're twisting my life to fit your narrative of the doddering old mother who needs to be managed for her own good. We arrived at Mr. Harrington's office building in tense silence. The austere brick structure housed one of the city's oldest and most respected law firms, where Richard had worked for the latter part of his career, specializing in medical malpractice cases but also handling estate planning for colleagues and friends. Mr. Harrington greeted us in the firm's wood-paneled conference room, his silver hair and bow tie giving him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than a lawyer. At 75, he had officially retired but still kept a handful of longtime clients, including, apparently, the Blackwood family. Eleanor, he said warmly, kissing my cheek. You look well, despite your recent ordeal. And these must be Thomas and Rebecca. Richard spoke of you often. My children murmured polite greetings, clearly uncomfortable and uncertain why we were there. Once we were seated, Mr. Harrington adjusted his bow tie and addressed us all. I understand there's some confusion regarding the ownership and potential sale of the Blackwood residence on Maple Street. Thomas leaned forward. Not confusion, exactly. We're exploring options for our mother's future care and financial security. The house represents a significant untapped asset. Untapped, Mr. Harrington repeated, raising an eyebrow. An interesting choice of words for a family home, but regardless, I believe I can clarify the legal situation quite simply. He opened a folder and extracted several documents. The house at 1842 Maple Street is owned solely by Eleanor Blackwood, following the transfer of ownership after Richard's death per the terms of their wills. We know that, Rebecca interjected impatiently. Mom would be the one signing the sale documents. We're just facilitating the process. Facilitating? Mr. Harrington echoed, his tone making the word sound vaguely obscene. Without her knowledge, or consent from what I understand. She had a concussion, Thomas protested. We were handling the preliminary details until she recovered. Mr. Harrington nodded as if this confirmed something. I see. Well, There's another document you should be aware of. He extracted a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. Richard left this with me with explicit instructions that it should only be opened if there was ever a dispute regarding the disposition of the house during Eleanor's lifetime. My children stared at the envelope. I already knew what it contained. Oh, duplicate of the letter and amendments I had found in Richard's desk. What is that? Rebecca asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. A contingency plan, Mr. Harrington replied, breaking the seal. Richard was nothing if not thorough in his legal preparations. He read the contents aloud. Richard's amendments to his will, specifying that if Thomas or Rebecca attempted to force the sale of our home during my lifetime, they would forfeit their inheritance entirely. The house and all our assets would instead go to the Richard Blackwood Memorial Scholarship Fund for Medical Ethics. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas's face had drained of color, while Rebecca's had flushed scarlet. This can't be legally binding, Thomas finally sputtered. It's coercive. It's entirely legal and properly executed, Mr. Harrington interrupted smoothly. Richard had it reviewed by 3 separate estate law specialists. It would withstand any challenge. You might consider mounting. We weren't forcing anything, Rebecca protested, her voice high and tight. We were making suggestions, exploring options. You brought developers into my home while I was in the hospital, I reminded her quietly. You labeled my possessions for distribution. You secured me a place in a facility I repeatedly refused. Those aren't suggestions. Those are actions. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. I should also inform you that Mrs. Blackwood has asked me to handle any future negotiations regarding her property. Any communication from developers, retirement facilities, or other interested parties should be directed to me, not to Mrs. Blackwood, herself, or to either of you. Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. We were trying to help. You're making us sound like villains when all we wanted was what's best for everyone. What's best for me, I said firmly, is to live in my home, make my own decisions, and be treated with respect by my children. Is that really so difficult to understand? Rebecca was crying now, silent tears tracking her makeup. You don't understand the pressure we're under, she whispered. Thomas's development company is struggling. My division might be downsized. The private schools, the mortgages, the expectations. We just needed something to go right. So, you decided to liquidate my home? I asked, my heart breaking for what they had become. Without even having an honest conversation with me about your financial struggles. Thomas grabbed his coat. This meeting is over. Come on, Rebecca. How will I get home? I asked. Call your friend Mrs. Abernathy, he replied coldly. Since you prefer her company to ours. After they stormed out, Mr. Harrington poured me a glass of water from a crystal decanter on the sideboard. That went about as well as could be expected. Which means terribly, I sighed. They hate me now. They're embarrassed and thwarted, he corrected. Hate may come later, or perhaps reflection. Richard anticipated this reaction, you know. He did. Mr. Harrington nodded. He told me once that Thomas and Rebecca had inherited his ambition, but not his ethical framework. He worried about how that would manifest as they faced life's inevitable disappointments and failures. I stared at my wedding ring, twisting it absently. He never shared those concerns with me. He didn't want to burden you. You were always the optimist in the relationship, ready to see the best in everyone, especially your children. He adored that quality in you. I smiled faintly. He balanced my optimism with pragmatism. I miss that balance every day. Well, he left you well protected legally. No one can touch your house without your consent. But I must ask, what do you want to do now? Return to your home? Stay with your neighbor? I considered the question carefully. I want to go home. It's time I reclaimed my space and my independence. But before that, I'd like to make some changes to my own will, if that's possible. Mr. Harrington raised an eyebrow but nodded. Of course. What did you have in mind? Mr. Harrington listened attentively as I outlined the changes I wanted to make to my will. Unlike Richard's amendment, which would disinherit our children if they forced a sale of the house during my lifetime, my modifications were more nuanced. I don't want to punish them permanently for a temporary moral lapse, I explained, but I do want to protect myself and ensure that whatever legacy I leave reflects my values. We spent the next hour drafting the new provisions. Rather than a simple division of assets between Thomas and Rebecca, I established a trust that would release funds gradually and with specific conditions. A portion would be set aside for my grandchildren's education, bypassing their parents entirely. Another portion would go to the hospital where I had worked, establishing a nursing scholarship in my name. Most importantly, I emphasized, I want to establish that the house cannot be sold for at least 5 years after my death, and when it is sold, a significant percentage of the proceeds must go to the Historic Preservation Society. This house deserves to be protected, not demolished for another soulless development. Mr. Harrington nodded approvingly as he made notes. Richard would be proud. You're protecting your interests without burning bridges. It's a delicate balance. After finalizing the changes, I asked Mr. Harrington to drive me home. I need to face this head-on, I said. No more hiding at Harriet's, no matter how delightful her company. The drive back to Maple Street was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. As we turned onto my block, I noticed with relief that all the unfamiliar cars were gone from in front of my house. No developers, no assessors, no children planning my involuntary relocation. Would you like me to come in with you? Mr. Harrington asked as he pulled into my driveway. Make sure everything is in order? I considered his offer, tempted by the security of having an ally with me. But something inside me, the same steel core that had helped me through 42 years of nursing, through Richard's death, through countless challenges, said no. This was my battle, my home, my life to reclaim. Thank you, but I'll be fine, I assured him. I need to do this alone. He helped me carry my small bag to the door, then handed me his card. Call me day or night if you need anything, and I'll send a courier tomorrow with the final documents for your signature. As I unlocked my front door, I braced myself for what I might find inside. Had they continued preparing the house for sale in my absence? Would more of my possessions be labeled for distribution or disposal? To my surprise, the house looked almost normal. The post-it notes were gone, the furniture back in its proper place. The only evidence of disruption was my filing cabinet, still slightly ajar, and a vase of fresh flowers on the hall table. Not my usual arrangement, but clearly someone's attempt to make the house presentable for the developer's visit. I moved through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with the home that had nearly been taken from me. In the kitchen, a note was propped against the coffee maker, Rebecca's handwriting. Mom, I've restocked your fridge with fresh groceries. Call when you're ready to talk. Love, Rebecca. An olive branch, or another attempt at manipulation. With my children, it had become difficult to tell where genuine care ended and self-interest began. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the back porch, settling into the wicker chair where Richard and I had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. The garden needed attention. Retirement had given me time to finally plant the roses I'd always wanted, but the recent drama had left them neglected. As I sipped my tea, I heard a car door slam out front. My body tensed, preparing for another confrontation with Thomas or Rebecca. But the figure that appeared around the side of the house was neither of my children. Eleanor, you're home, Harriet called, waving a bottle of wine triumphantly. I brought reinforcements for the siege. I laughed, relief washing over me. The siege appears to be temporarily lifted. Come join me. Harriet settled into the chair beside mine, uncorking the wine with practiced efficiency. So, how did the legal showdown go? Did Richard's amendments throw them into a proper tizzy? I recounted the meeting with Mr. Harrington, Thomas, and Rebecca's reactions and my own amendments to my will. Harriet listened, occasionally muttering choice medieval curses when I described my children's behavior. It's not resolved, I concluded. They're angry and embarrassed now, but they'll regroup. This isn't over. Of course it isn't, Harriet agreed, pouring generous glasses of Cabernet. Entitlement doesn't evaporate in a single afternoon, but you've drawn a clear boundary, and that's the critical first step. We sat in companionable silence, watching the evening light transform my garden. Finally, I voiced the question that had been haunting me. Am I a bad mother, Harriet? Did I fail them somehow, that they've become so mercenary? Harriet considered the question seriously. You were a devoted mother who worked extraordinarily hard to give your children every advantage. Perhaps too many advantages, with too little emphasis on the value of what they were receiving. Richard said something similar once, I admitted. He worried we were raising them with privilege but not perspective. He was right, but that doesn't make you a bad mother. It makes you human, trying your best with the wisdom you had at the time. Harriet raised her glass. To learning, at any age. I clinked my glass against hers. To learning, indeed. That night, alone in my house for the first time since my fall, I slept restlessly. Every creak and settling noise startled me awake, my subconscious on high alert for intruders, whether developers or my own children. By morning, I was exhausted, but determined to reclaim not just my house, but my life. Over breakfast, I made a list. If I was going to truly secure my independence, I needed more than just legal protections. I needed practical safeguards and a support system beyond Harriet, wonderful as she was. Most of all, I needed purpose, something to fill my retirement. Years with meaning beyond simply defending my territory. First on my list, change the locks. It wasn't that I expected Thomas to break in, but I needed the psychological security of knowing I controlled access to my home. One call to a locksmith, and by noon, I had new keys and a state-of-the-art security system being installed. Next, rebuild my support network. During my nursing career, I'd had countless colleagues and friends, but many of those relationships had faded with retirement. It was time to reconnect, to build community not centered on my children. I started with a call to Dr. Reynolds, my former chief of cardiology. "Eleanor!" he exclaimed, genuinely delighted to hear from me. "How's retirement treating you? We miss you terribly at Memorial." I gave him an edited version of recent events, emphasizing my desire to stay active and connected. "I'm not looking to return to full-time nursing," I clarified, "but I miss the hospital, the purpose, the community." "Funny you should call," he replied. "We've been discussing a patient advocacy program. Experienced medical professionals, helping patients navigate the system, especially those without family support. It would be part-time, flexible hours. Would something like that interest you?" By the end of our conversation, I had agreed to come in the following week to discuss the position. It wouldn't pay much, but money wasn't my concern. Purpose was. The courier from Mr. Harrington's office arrived that afternoon with my amended will for signing. As I reviewed the document one last time, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolution. These legal precautions represented a fundamental breakdown of trust with my children, yet they also represented my reclamation of autonomy. I signed my name with a steady hand, then sent the courier back with the executed documents. One more piece of security in place. That evening, my phone rang, Rebecca calling for the third time that day. After ignoring her previous calls, I decided it was time to answer. "Mom," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "How are you feeling? We've been worried." "I'm well," I replied neutrally. "The new locks and security system are working nicely." A pause. "You changed the locks?" "Yes, a necessary precaution, given recent events." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I think we need to talk. In person. There are things I want to explain." "I'm listening now," I said, unwilling to be manipulated into another ambush meeting. "Not like this, not over the phone." She sounded genuinely distressed. "Please, Mom, just lunch. Tomorrow. Just you and me. No Thomas." I considered her request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from further manipulation. But another part, the part that remembered Rebecca as a determined little girl, with skinned knees and fierce dreams, couldn't completely shut the door. "One condition," I said finally. "We meet at neutral territory. Not my house, not yours." "The cafe at the art museum?" she suggested. "They have those scones you like." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of warmth that she remembered my fondness for the museum cafe's cranberry scones. Fine, tomorrow at noon. After hanging up, I called Harriet to tell her about the meeting. "It could be another tactic," she warned. "Divide and conquer, Rebecca playing good cop to Thomas's bad cop." "Possibly," I acknowledged. "But I need to at least hear her out. She's still my daughter." "Then I'll be your backup," Harriet declared. "I'll sit at a separate table, pretending to be a doddering old lady fascinated by her soup. If things go south, I'll create a diversion. Perhaps spill something on that museum director who's always leering at the younger docents." I laughed, grateful once again for her fierce loyalty. "That won't be necessary, but knowing you're there will help." The next morning, I dressed carefully for my lunch with Rebecca, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident and composed. A tailored navy dress I'd often worn to hospital board meetings. Professional, dignified, but not intimidating. I wanted to present myself as the capable woman I was, not the fragile elder they had tried to relegate to a retirement home. The art museum was bustling with a school group when I arrived. Children, darting excitedly between exhibits while harried teachers attempted to corral them toward educational objectives. I smiled, remembering similar field trips with Thomas and Rebecca decades ago. Rebecca had always been drawn to the abstract expressionists, while Thomas preferred the precise lines of the architectural drawings. Even then, their personalities had been so distinct, so clearly formed. I spotted Rebecca already seated at a corner table in the cafe, checking her watch nervously. At 39, she was at the height of her professional powers, stylish, confident, commanding. Yet as I approached, I saw something in her posture that reminded me of the anxious teenager who had crashed the family car and been afraid to tell us. "Mom," she said, standing to embrace me. "Thank you for coming." I accepted her hug but kept it brief. "You wanted to talk. I'm here to listen." She waited until we had ordered herbal tea and scones for me, espresso for her, before launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "First, I want to apologize for how everything happened. The way we approached the house situation was wrong. We should have been upfront with you from the beginning." I nodded, but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "But I need you to understand where we were coming from." She leaned forward earnestly. "Thomas is in serious financial trouble. His latest development project is underwater, and he's leveraged everything, including his house. He could lose it all." "And that's my responsibility how?" I asked quietly. She flinched slightly. "It's not your responsibility, but we're family. When one of us is drowning, the others throw a lifeline. That's what families do." "By going behind my back? By treating me like I'm incompetent?" "That was wrong," she admitted. "But we were desperate. Thomas was too proud to ask for help directly, and I was trying to find a solution that would work for everyone." Our food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. I took a bite of my scone, buying time to process her words. Across the cafe, I spotted Harriet at a small table, pretending to be engrossed in an art catalog but clearly monitoring our interaction. "What about you, Rebecca?" I asked finally. "Thomas may be in financial trouble, but you've always been prudent with money. Why were you so invested in selling my house?" She looked down at her untouched espresso. "My division is being restructured. I'll probably survive the cuts, but my bonus this year, which we've already spent on the kids' private school tuition and the vacation house renovations, is likely gone. And Jason's startup is still burning through investment with no profit in sight. So rather than adjusting your lifestyle, you decided my house was the solution." "It wasn't just about the money," she protested. "We were genuinely worried about you living alone, especially after the fall. But yes, the timing of Jenkins's offer seemed providential." I studied my daughter's face, the face I had memorized, as an infant, watched change through childhood and adolescence into this capable, complicated woman. There was genuine distress there, but also calculation. She was still trying to salvage something from the situation. "What exactly do you want from me now, Rebecca?" "The house is off the table. Mr. Harrington has made that clear." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Jenkins came back with another offer. They're willing to let you keep lifetime occupancy of the house while technically purchasing it now. You'd get the money immediately, and they'd develop the property after you're gone." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're still trying to sell my house? After everything that's happened?" "It's a good deal, Mom," she urged, pushing the folder toward me. "You'd have financial security. You could stay in your home, and we could resolve Thomas's crisis without disrupting your life." I pushed the folder back without opening it. "Let me be absolutely clear. The house is not for sale. Not now, not with occupancy clauses, not in any form. And the fact that you're still pushing this after what happened at Mr. Harrington's office tells me you haven't heard a word I've said." "Mom, please, no." I cut her off firmly. "This meeting is over. I had hoped we could begin rebuilding trust, but you're still trying to manipulate me." I stood, leaving my half-eaten scone and cooling tea. Across the cafe, Harriet was already gathering her things, ready to follow if needed. Rebecca grabbed my wrist. "Mom, wait. There's more we need to discuss." I gently but firmly removed her hand. "We have nothing more to discuss until you accept that my house and my life are mine to control. When you're ready to have that conversation, call me. Until then, I think we need some distance." As I walked away, she called after me, "What about the grandchildren? Are you cutting them off too?" I turned back, keeping my voice low to avoid making a scene. "That's manipulative and you know it. My issues with you and Thomas have nothing to do with my relationship with my grandchildren. They are always welcome in my home, which will remain my home." Outside the museum, Harriet caught up with me. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Still pushing for the sale?" she guessed. "With a supposed compromise? I keep living there while they effectively sell it out from under me." I was trembling with anger and disappointment. They just don't get it. This isn't about the building. It's about respect and autonomy. Harriet linked her arm through mine. "Ice cream," she declared. "This situation demands therapeutic ice cream." At the small parlor 2 blocks from the museum, we claimed a corner booth and ordered ridiculously elaborate sundaes, the kind I rarely allowed myself, but that seemed necessary for emotional fortification. "It's not just the house," I confided as we dug in. "It's that they see me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Even this compromise was about getting access to my assets, not about my well-being." "Of course it was," Harriet agreed, spearing a maraschino cherry. "But now you have a choice. You can keep fighting the same battle with them, or you can change the terms of engagement entirely." What do you mean? Stop making this about defending against their siege. Start building the life you want, with or without their approval. The best defense isn't a wall. It's a life so fulfilling they can't breach it with their demands. I considered her words carefully, licking caramel sauce from my spoon. The patient advocacy position at the hospital. Exactly. And your garden that needs attention. And that watercolor class you always said you'd take when you retired. Fill your life so completely with purpose and joy that their machinations become irrelevant. On the walk home, Harriet's advice crystallized something in me. For too long, even before this conflict over the house, I had defined myself in relation to others. Nurse, wife, mother, widow. Perhaps it was time to define myself primarily for myself. As I turned onto Maple Street, I noticed an unfamiliar car in my driveway, not Thomas's SUV or Rebecca's sleek sedan, but an older model pickup truck with a landscaping company logo on the door. A young woman was examining my neglected rose bushes with a professional eye. "Can I help you?" I called, as I approached. She turned, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Blackwood? I'm Sophia from Green Thumb Landscaping. Your son hired us to give you an estimate on garden maintenance." I sighed, recognizing another attempt to manage my life without my input. I didn't request any landscaping services. Oh, she looked confused. Mr. Blackwood was quite specific. He said his mother needed help maintaining the garden now that she was older. She winced slightly, clearly uncomfortable with whatever ageist terms Thomas had used. I should have been angry at yet another intrusion, but instead, I found myself studying Sophia more carefully. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with calloused hands that spoke of real work rather than merely supervising others. The clipboard contained detailed notes about soil conditions and plant varieties, not just a quick commercial estimate, but a thoughtful assessment. "Do you enjoy garden restoration, Sophia?" I asked. She brightened immediately. "It's my specialty, actually. I studied horticultural preservation at the State University. Historic gardens are my passion, maintaining the original design intent while adapting for climate change and sustainability." An idea began to form, not quite fully realized, but promising. "I don't need a maintenance service," I said, "but I might be interested in a collaboration. This garden was my husband's pride. I've let it decline since his death, and now that I'm retired, I'd like to restore it properly, perhaps with some updates for sustainability." Sophia's enthusiasm was palpable. "I'd love to help with something like that. It's exactly the kind of project I'm trying to build my portfolio with." "Then forget my son's request. Let's you and I discuss what this garden could become. Not as a service provider and client, but as collaborators. I have the time and some knowledge. You have the expertise and the physical stamina I sometimes lack. What do you think?" As Sophia and I walked the garden perimeter, discussing possibilities and sharing visions, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Richard's death. The electric thrill of creative partnership, of building something meaningful with someone who shared my values. By the time she left 2 hours later, we had a rough plan for the garden's resurrection and a scheduled meeting for the following week. More importantly, I had the first piece of my new life in place, a project that honored Richard's memory, while creating something new and entirely mine. That evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, the same view I had treasured for 45 years, my phone chimed with a text from Thomas. Did the landscapers come by? Just trying to help with the garden, no pressure. I considered ignoring it, but instead typed, "They came. I've hired the lead gardener as a consultant for a major restoration project. My treat to myself for retirement. I don't need your help managing my home or my affairs, but I would welcome your respect for my decisions." His response came quickly. "It was just a garden service, Mom. No need to make everything a federal case." I put the phone away without responding. Some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when I was busy building something better than endless conflict. Harriet was right. The best defense wasn't a wall, but a life too fulfilling to breach. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, energized by purpose. I had a garden to plan, a new career in patient advocacy to prepare for, and a life to reclaim. My children's betrayal still hurt, a pain I suspected would never fully disappear. But it no longer defined my days. As I sipped my morning coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise gild my neglected but still beautiful garden, I reflected on Richard's foresight in protecting our home. He had known our children better than I had allowed myself to, had anticipated their weaknesses even while loving them unconditionally. "I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner," I said aloud, imagining him beside me as I had so many mornings. "But I'm listening now, and I'm finally ready to live for myself." The garden restoration project with Sophia quickly became the cornerstone of my new life. What had begun as a simple idea blossomed into something far more meaningful than I could have anticipated. Each morning, I would wake with purpose, eager to continue our work transforming the neglected space into something that honored Richard's original vision while incorporating sustainable elements that spoke to the future. Sophia proved to be not just knowledgeable but genuinely passionate about historic garden preservation. She arrived each Tuesday and Thursday morning with sketches, plant suggestions, and boundless enthusiasm. Her youth and energy complemented my experience and patience. Where I saw memories to preserve, she saw possibilities to enhance. "These rose bushes are heritage varieties," she explained one morning, carefully pruning decades-old stems. "They're not commonly available anymore. With proper care, they could become a teaching tool for other gardeners interested in historic plants." This casual observation sparked an idea that would ultimately transform not just my garden, but my entire approach to this new chapter of my life. "What if we documented the restoration?" I suggested. "Not just for ourselves, but as a resource for others interested in historic gardens and sustainable adaptations." Sophia's eyes lit up. "Like a blog or an online journal? That would be amazing for my portfolio, and it could help other homeowners with similar gardens." Thus, the Resurrection Garden was born, a digital chronicle of our efforts that combined my storytelling with Sophia's technical expertise. I had never considered myself technologically adept, but necessity proved a powerful motivator. With Sophia's patient guidance, I learned to use a digital camera, basic photo editing software, and even social media platforms to share our progress. To my surprise, our little project began to attract attention beyond our initial circle. Local gardening enthusiasts commented on our posts, offering suggestions and encouragement. The Historical Preservation Society reached out, interested in including our garden in their annual tour. A regional gardening magazine requested an interview about intergenerational collaboration in garden restoration. What had begun as a personal project of reclamation had evolved into something communal and educational. For the first time since retirement, I felt truly useful, not just busy, but meaningfully engaged in creating something valuable. Meanwhile, my work at the hospital was evolving in similarly unexpected ways. What had started as a part-time position in patient advocacy became increasingly focused on helping elderly patients navigate the healthcare system and assert their autonomy in medical decisions. Dr. Reynolds had been right. My experience as both a healthcare provider and a senior citizen facing my own challenges with autonomy made me uniquely qualified to help others in similar situations. I found myself drawing on my recent conflicts with Thomas and Rebecca to help patients stand firm against well-meaning but controlling family members. "Your children love you," I would tell my elderly patients. "But loving someone doesn't automatically grant them the right to make decisions for you. Your voice matters most when it comes to your health and your future." These parallel paths, the garden restoration and patient advocacy, gave my days structure and purpose. But more importantly, they connected me with a community beyond my immediate family. I was building relationships based on shared interests and mutual respect, rather than obligation or history. 6 weeks into our garden project, Sophia arrived, with unexpected news. "Mrs. Blackwood, remember how I mentioned your roses to my professor from university? Well, she's fascinated by what we're doing here, especially the documentation aspect. She wants to know if we'd consider turning this into a more formal case study for her historic landscape preservation course." I was taken aback. "A case study? You mean students would learn from our project?" "Exactly. Your garden would become a teaching tool. Students would visit occasionally to observe our work, and our documentation would become part of the curriculum." The idea both thrilled and intimidated me. My garden, my private sanctuary, would become public in a way I hadn't anticipated. Yet wasn't this exactly what I had been seeking? Purpose, connection, legacy? "Let's do it," I decided. On one condition, I want to be involved in the educational component, not just as the homeowner, but as a participant in the teaching process. And so, in addition to patient advocacy and garden restoration, I found myself occasionally lecturing to landscape architecture students about the emotional dimensions of garden preservation, how spaces hold memories, how restoration honors both past and future, how gardens can be acts of resistance against the relentless pressure to develop and modernize every square inch of historic neighborhoods. These new roles, garden documentarian, patient advocate, occasional lecturer, filled my calendar and expanded my world in ways retirement alone never could have. Each week brought new challenges and connections, gradually pushing the painful situation with my children from the center of my consciousness to the periphery. That's not to say the conflict had disappeared. Thomas maintained a chilly distance, occasionally sending terse text messages that felt more like status checks than genuine communication. "Hope you're doing well. House still standing? Need anything?" The subtext was clear. I was a problem to be managed, not a person to be engaged with. Rebecca's approach was more complex. After our disastrous lunch at the museum, she had retreated for several weeks. Then, the tentative peace offerings began. A delivery of my favorite pastries from the bakery across town, a handwritten card expressing, somewhat generically, her love and concern, an invitation to her daughter Madison's piano recital. I accepted the invitation to the recital, unwilling to punish my granddaughter for her mother's actions. The evening was awkward but civil, with Rebecca careful to avoid any mention of the house or my living situation. As we applauded Madison's competent if somewhat hesitant rendition of Fur-Elise, I caught Rebecca watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between curiosity and confusion. "You look well, Mom," she said afterward, as Madison collected congratulations from other families. "Different somehow." "I am different," I replied simply. "I'm building a life that fits who I am now, not who I was or who others expect me to be." She seemed about to say more when her husband Jason approached, effectively ending our brief moment of potential connection. But her words stayed with me. "You look different." Confirmation that my internal transformation was becoming visible to others. 3 months after my confrontation with Thomas and Rebecca at Mr. Harrington's office, the first frost of autumn arrived. Sophia and I spent a long day preparing the garden for winter, covering delicate plants and completing the documentation of our progress thus far. The transformation was remarkable, not complete by any means, but the bones of something beautiful were clearly visible. "We've accomplished so much," Sophia said, surveying our work with satisfaction. "By spring, this will be showcase-ready for the preservation tour." As we gathered our tools, a sleek black SUV pulled into my driveway. Thomas, we hadn't spoken, face to face since that day in Mr. Harrington's office. He approached cautiously, eyeing Sophia and the garden with evident surprise. "Mom, you've been busy." "Thomas, this is Sophia Garcia, my garden design collaborator. Sophia, my son Thomas." Sophia, sensing tension, quickly excused herself to pack up her truck, leaving Thomas and me facing each other across the garden we had just prepared for winter. Collaborator? He repeated, his tone somewhere between impressed and skeptical. That's quite an upgrade from the maintenance service I tried to arrange. It's become much more than maintenance, I explained, gesturing to the transformed space. We're documenting historic garden restoration techniques for educational purposes. The university is involved now. He looked genuinely taken aback. The university? Mom, that's unexpected. Many things in life are, when we open ourselves to possibilities beyond the obvious. I intentionally echoed the platitudes he had often directed at me during his attempts to sell my house. What brings you here today, Thomas? He shifted, uncomfortably. I wanted to check on you. It's been a while, and with winter coming, I'm perfectly capable of preparing for winter, as you can see. I kept my tone neutral, neither inviting nor rejecting his concern. Would you like to come in for coffee? Sophia and I were just finishing up. Inside, Thomas moved through the house with the awkward air of a stranger, though he had grown up, in these rooms. As I prepared coffee, he examined the changes I had made since our conflict began. New photographs on the walls documenting the garden restoration, books on landscape architecture and patient advocacy stacked on the coffee table, a bulletin board covered with notes and schedules reflecting my busy new life. You've been productive, he observed cautiously. I've been living, I corrected, handing him a mug, creating a life that engages and fulfills me. We sat at the kitchen table where we had shared countless family meals over the decades. The silence between us felt heavy with unspoken accusations and apologies. Finally, Thomas spoke. I came because Jenkins called me. Their development project is moving forward without our property, but they wanted to know if you might reconsider. They're still interested in the lot. I set my mug down carefully. And you're still interested in facilitating that sale. It's just business, Mom, he said, an edge of defensiveness entering his voice. Real estate is my business, and this property is extremely valuable. More valuable as a development opportunity than as your childhood home? As the house your father lovingly restored? As my home and sanctuary? He looked away. That's emotional thinking. The practical reality is that this house is an appreciating asset that's currently underutilized. Underutilized, I repeated, tasting the corporate blandness of the word. Is that how you see my life here? As inefficient use of square footage? Thomas sighed heavily. I didn't come to fight again. I just thought you should know the offer still stands. Jenkins is willing to be very generous. I studied my son's face, the boy I had raised, now hidden behind this businessman's mask. What had shaped him into someone who could reduce his mother's home to a transaction, his father's legacy to an underutilized asset? Thomas, I said gently, I want to understand something. When did money become more important than people to you? When did success become measured solely in financial terms rather than in relationships or personal fulfillment? His face hardened. That's unfair. Money isn't just about greed, it's about security, about providing opportunities for my family. About control, I interjected quietly. About measuring your worth in square footage and investment returns. You sound like Dad, he muttered. Good. Your father was a wise man who understood the difference between price and value. I reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but bridging some of the distance between us. The house isn't for sale, Thomas. Not now, not ever during my lifetime. I've built something meaningful here, not just with the garden project, but with my advocacy work at the hospital, with the community I'm creating. This isn't about stubborn sentimentality. It's about choosing a life of purpose over a life of maximum financial efficiency. Thomas remained silent, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he stood up. I should go. Thanks for the coffee. At the door, he paused. The garden does look nice. Different than when Dad was alive, but Nice. It wasn't much, but it was the first genuine acknowledgement he had offered about my new projects. A tiny crack in the wall of his fixation on the house's monetary value. "You and your family are always welcome to visit," I said. "Not to discuss selling the house, but to be part of my life, if you want to be." He nodded stiffly and left, the SUV pulling away with a quiet purr of expensive engineering. I wasn't naive enough to believe our fundamental conflict was resolved, but perhaps this was the beginning of a shift, not in my position, but in his perception of me as someone with agency and purpose, rather than an obstacle to his financial plans. The winter months brought new dimensions to my evolving life. While outdoor work on the garden paused, Sophia and I focused on completing our documentation and preparing presentations for both the university course and the historical preservation society. I found myself unexpectedly enjoying the technical aspects of the project, learning to create compelling digital presentations, organizing our photographs and notes into a coherent narrative, developing my public speaking skills beyond what I had needed as a nurse. My patient advocacy work intensified as flu season hit the hospital hard. Elderly patients, particularly vulnerable to complications, needed strong voices to ensure their care preferences were respected amid the chaos of overcrowded wards and overworked staff. I found myself working 3 or 4 days a week rather than the original 2, drawn back into the rhythms of hospital life, but now from a different perspective. Through it all, I maintained my independence and autonomy, managing my own schedule, making my own decisions, living life according to my priorities rather than others' expectations. The confidence this fostered was profound, transforming how I interacted with everyone from my patients to my neighbors to my family. Rebecca's daughter Madison began visiting regularly, ostensibly to interview me for a school project about elders' life experiences, but clearly enjoying our time together beyond the academic requirements. At 15, she was at that delicate age where she was beginning to see her parents as flawed humans rather than perfect authorities, a perspective that made her particularly receptive to my story of reclaiming independence. "Mom never talks about what happened with the house," she confided one afternoon as she helped me organize photographs for the garden presentation. "But Dad mentioned it during an argument. He said she and Uncle Thomas had mishandled the whole thing badly and underestimated you completely." I smiled at the diplomatic phrasing. They did indeed underestimate me. Many people do that with older women, assume that age has diminished our capacity or determination. Madison studied a photograph of me kneeling in the garden, dirt-stained, and beaming beside a newly transplanted heritage rosebush. "I think that's why I like coming here," she said thoughtfully. "You're doing things, not just existing. Most of my friends' grandparents seem to be just waiting, you know? But you're building stuff." "Building stuff," I repeated, touched by her adolescent eloquence. "That's exactly right. I'm building a life that matters to me." Our conversations became a highlight of my weeks. Through Madison's visits, I maintained some connection to Rebecca's family, though Rebecca herself remained cautiously distant, driving Madison to my house but rarely coming inside, offering polite greetings but avoiding substantive conversation. As for Thomas, our coffee encounter seemed to have shifted something subtle between us. The terse text messages continued, but occasionally they included genuine questions about the garden project or my hospital work. He was still fixated on the house's monetary value, but at least he had begun to see that my life within it had value too. In February, an unexpected snowstorm hit our region, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow in a single night. I woke to a transformed landscape, the garden buried under pristine white, the old Victorian windows frosted with intricate patterns. The beauty was breathtaking, but the practical implications were concerning. At my age, shoveling that much. Snow was beyond my physical capacity, and I had appointments at the hospital that couldn't be easily rescheduled. I was contemplating my options when a familiar sound reached my ears, the rumble of a snowblower starting up. Looking out the front window, I was astonished to see Thomas clearing my driveway, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his face red with exertion in the cold morning air. I pulled on a heavy sweater and went out onto the porch. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" He glanced up, barely pausing in his methodical clearing of the snow. "What does it look like, clearing your driveway? But how did you know I'd need help?" "I haven't called anyone yet." He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it transported me back to his teenage years. "You always go to the hospital on Wednesdays." I figured the snow would make that difficult. I was touched that he had remembered my schedule, that he had come without being asked, that he was performing this physical act of care despite our ongoing differences. "Thank you," I said simply. He nodded, returning to his task without further conversation. When he finished nearly an hour later, I invited him in for hot chocolate, a tradition from his childhood snow days. To my surprise, he accepted. As we sat in the kitchen with steaming mugs, a tentative truce seemed to settle between us. Not reconciliation, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of mutual respect. "The development fell through," he said eventually. "Jenkins couldn't acquire enough adjacent properties to make the project viable without your lot." "I'm sorry for your professional disappointment," I said, meaning it. "But not sorry they won't be demolishing this neighborhood." He almost smiled. "Yeah, well, win some, lose some, that's business." "And how is your business doing otherwise? You mentioned some financial concerns." Thomas tensed visibly. "Managing. The market's shifting, but I'm adapting." Translation. Still struggling, but too proud to discuss details. I chose not to press further. "And Rebecca?" "Madison comes?" "Often, but Rebecca stays in the car." "She's—" He hesitated. "She took the whole thing harder than I did, honestly. She really thought she was doing what was best for you." Finding out Dad had anticipated her actions and specifically guarded against them, it wounded her pride, I think. "And yours?" I asked gently. He looked into his mug as if the answers might be floating in the chocolate. "Mine too, at first. But lately I've been thinking about something Dad used to say, about measuring a life by more than just financial metrics. Seeing what you've created here with the garden, with your hospital work, it's made me reconsider some things." It wasn't an apology, nor a complete transformation of perspective, but it was honest, and it acknowledged the validity of my choices in a way he hadn't before. "Thank you for clearing the snow," I said, recognizing that for Thomas, practical help was easier than emotional vulnerability. "It means a lot to me." He nodded, finishing his hot chocolate and standing to leave. At the door, he paused. "Mom, the garden preservation thing, it's good. Dad would have liked it." Those simple words, acknowledging both my project and Richard's values, felt like the first genuine healing in our fractured relationship. Not complete restoration, but the beginning of new growth, much like the garden itself. As winter gradually yielded to spring, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed in less than a year. From the uncertainty and vulnerability of early retirement to the rich tapestry of purpose and connection I had woven, the transformation felt almost miraculous. The garden was preparing for its renaissance, new growth pushing through soil we had carefully prepared. The university students would be arriving for their first on-site workshop next month. My patient advocacy program had been officially recognized by the hospital board as an essential service, with funding secured for expansion. And slowly, tentatively, my relationship with my children was evolving into something new. Not the unquestioning authority I once held, nor the infantilizing control they had attempted to assert, but a more balanced recognition of our separate but connected lives. One mild March evening, as I sat on my porch watching the first crocuses emerge in the front garden, a car pulled into my driveway. Rebecca's, but to my surprise, She got out rather than waiting in the vehicle as she usually did when dropping off Madison. She approached hesitantly, carrying a small gift bag. "Mom, do you have a minute?" "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair beside mine. "The crocuses are just starting to bloom." She sat, placing the bag between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. And therapy, actually." Jason insisted, after everything that happened. This surprised me. Rebecca had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary for people with proper coping skills, a stance that had concerned me given the high-pressure nature of her career. "Thomas mentioned you cleared Mom's driveway during the big snow," she continued. "He said you two had hot chocolate after, that you're different now. More yourself, somehow." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I brought you something. It's not a peace offering exactly, because that would imply this is a simple conflict to resolve with a gift. It's more of a recognition." I opened the bag to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with an intricate garden design. "Madison told me about your documentation project," Rebecca explained. "She said you're keeping records digitally, but I thought maybe you might also want to write about the experience in a more personal way. Your thoughts, your feelings, as the garden evolves." The thoughtfulness of the gift, specifically tailored to my new passion rather than a generic peace offering, moved me deeply. "Thank you, Rebecca. This is perfect." She twisted her hands in her lap, uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been so wrong, Mom, about so many things. I thought I knew what was best for you because I couldn't see past my own assumptions about aging and retirement. I saw only what you were leaving behind, not what you were moving toward." "We all make mistakes," I said gently, "even with the best intentions." "My intentions weren't entirely pure," she admitted. "There was financial self-interest mixed in with genuine concern. But seeing what you've created these past months, the garden project, your advocacy work, the way you've connected with Madison, it's made me realize how narrow my vision was." I reached across the space between our chairs and took her hand. "It's never too late to see things differently, to choose a new path. That's what I've been learning every day since retirement." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the twilight deepen and the first stars appear. The distance between us hadn't disappeared entirely, but a bridge was forming, built of mutual respect rather than obligation or authority. "Would you like to see the garden plans?" I offered. "Sophia and I have mapped out the entire restoration schedule. Through fall." Rebecca smiled, a genuine smile untainted by calculation or condescension. "I'd like that very much." As I led my daughter through the house toward the back garden, I felt profound gratitude for the journey of the past year. What had begun as a crisis, my children attempting to sell my house while I was vulnerable, had transformed into an opportunity for growth and self-discovery beyond anything I could have imagined. The house remained mine, protected by Richard's foresight and my own determination. But more importantly, I had reclaimed ownership of my life, my choices, my time, my purpose. Through the garden restoration, the advocacy work, and the new relationships I had created a retirement, not of quiet withdrawal, but of engaged vitality. The real deed I had kept wasn't just the legal document hidden in Richard's desk. It was my deed to myself, my commitment to living authentically and purposefully for however many years remained to me. That was a treasure no one could sell or take away, and it had made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.